Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekachak.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 74th episode of By-The-Bywater. It is great to be back with you all, and this time around, we'll have Oriana talk about news because your movie Instagram site promoting things is now live for all the world to see. Can you tell us a little more about the Sight Unseen account?
Oh, yeah, it exists.
Yay.
What is the handle? I can't remember. I think it's like sight.unseen on Instagram.
Or sight.unseen movie or something like that?
Film, sight.unseen film.
Sight.unseen.film.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks, guys.
We'll link it, don't worry.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, we started posting, a little more. We're starting to move into marketing mode because the movie is finished. Our Kickstarter backers will be getting a screener in their inboxes. Digital screener because we don't have the money to make DVDs. But yeah, so that's good. That's exciting. And who knows? Who knows
indeed. So, but yeah, follow along with that if you want to see more about that. It's been fun seeing the clips. Stephen basically doing a lot of just, running around and doing things from what I can tell. Although there is that one bit of you like running after something, I seem to remember. That was pretty good.
Yes, I took off at a full sprint after that we were shooting some car scenes and the cars left. And I was like, oh no, they're, I thought they had forgotten a prop. No, they didn't need the prop. But yeah, so fun little shenanigans.
Vignettes and shenanigans. Meantime, still glowing, basking in the afterglow of his Crawford Award. Hey, I hear Jared's up for another award. What's the story here now?
I am. I've been nominated for the Astounding Award, which is awarded as part of Worldcon every year. It's the same, like the Hugo ceremony. It's not a Hugo. Be very clear on that point. But it is awarded to new writers. Basically, if you've been published within 2 years of the ceremony, you can be nominated. So this is my first year of eligibility, and if I win, I get a tiara.
This is
according to Wikipedia.
Astounding.
I don't know. I've never been to the Hugo. Yeah,
this is exactly what you should get, of course. So,
yeah. So I got to write an acceptance speech just in case.
And when will news of that be announced?
So Worldcon happens in mid-August.
Okay.
So
that's so far away.
I know. Well, so the final ballot is set. And now people have to actually read the nominated works.
Okay.
and vote on
Makes
them.
Makes sense.
So, that's 4 months, really. So it's going to be a bit until we know.
We'll find out.
Losing it. I'm actually, Worldcon is in Seattle this year, so I get to attend.
Oh, well, that's great.
And win or lose in person.
Amazing.
Yes. Yeah. Hopefully win. So that's, of course. I mean, come on. So, all right, great. As for me, I'm still writing and doing things and publishing things and all the rest of it. In fact, by the time this episode is out, I can say I will have had a manual guest appearance with my friends who run the Eurowhat podcast, where we talk about Eurovision and music, and you get to hear about a whole other side of me. So that I keep from this podcast for sanity's sake. So in any event, so although we can say that one of the entries this year is a philologist out of Serbia who knows Norwegian, is a black belt in karate, has sung lead in musicals, and has a ballad that he's delivering in, and I'm just like, I'm trying, and he looks like a beardy version, slightly scrawnier version of 90s romance cover models like Fabio, and I'm just sort of like, I want to see Tolkien meet this guy somewhere. And things like this. So I'm a philologist too, and you just have him be like, yeah. What?
No, he could definitely be on the cover of a current paranormal romance.
Oh, absolutely.
He has that.
Yeah,
there.
Bit of the romantasy vibe. So he's trying at least. So anyway, we'll throw in a link to him as well. So
I'm sorry. Speaking of romantasy, this is so off topic, but I'm losing my mind over this. I saw somebody ask on Instagram the other day, is there fantasy where they're not constantly talking about romance or sex or whatever? And I was like, have you heard of Tolkien, the least sexy writer in existence.
God.
Wow.
Like, I love him, but like,
Wow, that's
like fantasy is.
That's
It's
so
not
funny.
romantasy. It's not the same. Anyway, there's a whole debate over what genre includes what, but it's like, what have you only read A Court of Thorns and Roses? Is that what you think fantasy is?
Yes.
Clearly. I mean, gosh, are those that third wing thing or whatever it's called, or just oh boy, yeah,
Fourth wing.
Like,
I am going to start calling it third wing.
I'm not going to pretend I care. I know it's popular, but so
yeah, like I don't want to dismiss it because I haven't read either one of them, but like just in terms of what genre you're reading, it's like this is not representative of everything that's out there. So
fantasy has eaten the genre in some eyes. Wow, I mean, we all come in where we do. It's all the assumptions, but 30, 20 years ago, people would be going Harry Potter more than Tolkien, at least before the films came out. So just there we are. We won't talk about her. Anyway, let's move on to something different and happier, and actually Tolkien related news. Not really, but something did get published, which is of interest. So, Jared, take it away.
It's another very quiet month in terms of Tolkien news, but there has been a new extended news piece about one of the greatest contributors to the world and work he created, the cartographer Wynn Fonstad, creator of the rightly famed The Atlas of Middle-earth. As we mentioned a few months back, the New York Times did one of their welcome pieces where they create proper obituaries for people of note that they didn't talk about at the time, Fonstad having unfortunately died due to cancer back in 2005. Though she was born in Oklahoma, she lived and worked for much of her life in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. In this new piece, Wisconsin Public Radio did a combined feature and video on Fonstad's work based on the scanning being done via her husband and son of her maps of Middle-earth and beyond at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It's a really lovely appreciation of an excellent map maker and artist and contains a fascinating detail showcasing her own copy of her atlas signed by figures like Tolkien scholar Verlin Flieger.
Yes.
Somebody who knows can always correct us. Sean Astin, and most notably Alan Lee, whose message essentially confirms that her work was a clear reference used by Lee, John Howe, and the wider Peter Jackson team when it came to how Middle-earth was depicted on screen. Links to the piece are in our show notes.
Yeah, it's just it's nice to see her getting more appreciation. I mean, again, for my age, because I got the Atlas a couple of years after it was published, right when I got my first full plunge into Tolkien. That would have been, she published it in 81 is when it came out, and I got it in 84, the original hardcover edition, and of course it was revised since then. And to me, she was always just this known figure, especially with the other work that she did, which the article also discusses. And I always thought it was weird that they didn't feature her more in the documentaries for the film. Flip side was, however, that she only seemed to realize after the films got huge, you're like, oh, there's something here. So there was this really small window of time between her sort of recognizing and getting used to going out to like fan bases, conventions as mentioned, and then her unfortunate passing, which happened so soon after that. She can be seen briefly, I remember, in one of the Return of the King supplements. She's in there somewhere. So they did a hook with that. They visited her at her work where she did. So it was like, it's great to see her. So at least there's evidence of that. But yeah, seeing Lee basically say like, oh yeah, we were using your atlas, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. So it's just such a handy, wonderful guide, and I can't talk about it enough. It's truly marvelous. And the thing I still can't get over is how the article, which has a lovely video clip too, it's really nice, just showing some things they do, and the video clip shows us even more, is that she was working on an atlas for Narnia, and the C.S. Lewis estate turned her down, and I'm like, you fools!
Oh man,
that's insanity
and nuts. That would have been a wonderful thing. And seeing the snippets of what's there, it's sort of like, oh, well, once again, C.S. Lewis, fail. Or at least the reps. Once more. Well, anyway, I don't know if any of us have anything more to add to that. So we'll just plunge right ahead. The choice of topic this time around is Oriana's, and a good one it is. Oriana, the floor is yours.
Right now, there's a group of people in America who seem to be really champing at the bit to have a king again, and like I would say monarch, because I think these people call themselves monarchists, but like Lamau, come on, we know like America would never be okay with a queen. So we have various monarchs in the Lord of the Rings that we could and should talk about, but I want to come at this through the lens of Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Elisar, Telcontar, like, man of many names. He is the most prominent sort of monarch that we get to know, I guess, before he is a monarch. So what does he have to, like, what does he signify as the sort of most prominent king that we see, and one who does kind of have to convince others of his right to rule? What does this say about Tolkien's attitude toward the monarchy? Letter 52 is kind of the most mainstream source that we have for Tolkien talking directly about his political leanings towards, like, a quote-unquote anarchy in the sense of no formal control, or a, quote, unconstitutional monarchy. This is a letter to his son Christopher, who had just been called up to join the Royal Air Force at the time, and he says, quote, "The most improper job of any man, even saints, who at any rate were at least unwilling to take it on, is bossing other men. Not one in a million is fit for it, and least of all those who seek the opportunity. And at least it is done only to a small group of men who know who their master is." He continues, "Give me a king whose chief interest in life is stamps, railways, or racehorses, and who has the power to sack his vizier, or whatever you want to call, or whatever you care to call him, if he does not like the cut of his trousers." It also isn't like Tolkien thought this was ideal either. Like, he did acknowledge that this kind of monarchy does not really work unless conditions are right. And so to kind of bring this back to Aragorn, there is this little, it's like this tantalizing little tossed off line in letter 144, where where Tolkien is mostly talking about Gandalf, but also that Aragorn is Sauron's opposite, which I think is the sort of key to Aragorn's status as this platonic ideal of a king. Aragorn is extremely uninterested in domination, getting into everyone's business, machines. He's like 6'6". He's brave. He knows a lot of poems and songs. One thing we don't really get, which we'll talk about in a minute, is why does Aragorn want to be king? So, yes, he is the heir of Isildur, but theoretically, so was every male ancestor of his. Of course, we are given a reason that he can't marry Arwen without being king of Arnor and Gondor, but like that can't be it, right? Is that it? Is that what Tolkien thinks is the best reason to try? He's not coming at it from a desire for power, but for a desire to be a wife guy. That might actually be it.
Wow.
So before we answer those questions, which we will talk about, I want to know, if you guys had to pick a king, or, what are the qualities you would want in this king? Would you insist on a non-gender specific monarch? What would the overlap be with, like, Aragorn's traits? And, thoughts on Aragorn's tax policy, obviously.
Oh, God, I knew that was going to come up. Jared, do you want to take that one first?
Well, obviously, we have to have monarchs. If we have to have a monarch, they have to be capable of lots of fancy dress.
Oh, sure.
Like the Queen Elizabeth I of it all,
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't care if it's a king or a queen or a non-binary monarch. They need to have the satin and the brocade and all of that. Because otherwise, what's the point? What's the point?
Yeah.
No, like, weirdly, if I had to pick a king or whatever, they would look like Aragorn in a lot of ways. Even if we don't know his tax policy, the fact that he waits to be invited, basically.
Yeah.
He doesn't come in and force himself, even if he has the legal right to. Which, after that long, what does legal right even mean?
Like,
if a descendant of Charlemagne showed up and was like, I could be king of France now, would people be like, you know what, that's fine? Like,
sure.
And that's even, I think, a shorter time period.
Yes.
The one that anyway, but yeah, the way that he's like devoted to his people and all that, I would really prefer not to have a monarch, but one who's a nice guy, a wife guy,
quite literally.
Yeah.
For me, I would say the thing that is most, qualifying, I should say, for lack of a better term, for Aragorn is not revealed, or at least is not fully sensed until way later in the book, and mostly through the appendices. And that's the sense that he's actually been to a lot of these places and done things already. So we only learn about Thorongil, which is the name he gives himself as someone who is basically coming to assist Gondor in its border wars, which he does during the time of Denethor's father, if I remember correctly, Ecthelion. And again, it never identifies who it is. We find out through context. And as a result, it's sort of like, oh, nice little backfill. But it's one of those things like, if that had been made clear earlier, maybe, and it also ends up sort of explaining why Denethor is sort of like, about this person, precisely because he sort of suspects that's who it is. And that's one of those things like, again, if we're gonna throw in the Game of Thrones comparisons, that's the type of thing that we foregrounded in a Game of Thrones narrative as a very obvious thing. It is not. And again, this is sort of backing around the question, but the idea that someone who seemingly unqualified is in fact qualified, has a sense of what to do in doing certain things. Flip side is that it's been seen to be, in that context, it's essentially exclusively military. That make you a good king? And all that. So, I mean, even in the American presidential system, with the essentially, the temporary king model, we hope, is that you have things like Eisenhower becoming president. It's like he wouldn't have been president if he hadn't led things in World War II there. That was sort of a, gimme. Turned out to be comparatively all right, but it was one of those things sort of like, huh, what? And again, there's that identification there, whereas the idea of like what else he does, and this is even beyond tax policy, it is, to touch on things you've both mentioned, what is this person like as a person? Is this someone who you can talk with? Is there somebody you can treat with? We use Tolkien's formulation. Okay, what's Aragorn like when he's playing cards or whatever, things like that, or the equivalent, that sort of thing. He seems to value that. And it's interesting that he speaks about valuing that, admittedly in the context of, you could argue, the English royal monarchical system as it was at that time, and perhaps even more so now, versus the seen to be more active participant there. I was thinking, in some respects, though, backing up, and this is maybe a useful framing, is how so many kings are, basically their absence is what's noted throughout Tolkien. The lack of king, quite obviously, the biggest formulation is what we've just been talking about. But to use things like the Shire, the idea of like, no wonder it was Tolkien's ideal society. There's a king, but that doesn't even exist. It's sort of like, oh yeah, sure, something you don't actually have direct reference to. And Tolkien hyper-idealizes it in the appendices when basically Aragorn comes and say, yep, I'm not touching the Shire. In fact, no one stay in the Shire. It's sort of like, that to my mind is Tolkien going like, that's a good king. He's leaving my place alone. That sort of thing. It's an interesting thing of, it's sort of like you have to have a king, but you don't actually want them around. It's sort of like, and how do you exactly support that, build that? I'm not going to go deep into political science weeds here, but it's just an interesting formulation. And it's one sort of like everyone's pinky swearing on that. It's like, enjoy.
I don't know. I feel like it's kind of worth getting into the political science.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
like,
go.
Like medieval kingship, which is what he's really drawing from here, doesn't look like what people think it like.
Right.
Even and it varies between country. Like the English monarch is very different from the French monarch, which had, the French king had really no limits on power for most of its existence, whereas the English king monarch has had to deal with parliament since, for like 800 years, they've been limited by parliament. Even before that, there were other chunks. And even if a French king in theory was absolute, and that does vary by period, it's like they still had to basically convince their vassals to get involved in stuff. They couldn't just make a proclamation. They had to have everybody consent, and sometimes not everybody did. And Aragorn is dealing with that kind of situation. Like when Minas Tirith is trying to raise an army, Denethor can't just say everybody come in, and I'm pretty sure Aragorn can't either, although we don't see him do this. It's like, these people have sent what they feel is right, and the city doesn't like it, but they just have to deal with it because they don't have that kind of absolute control. So he's, in a way, I think Tolkien is looking at like a very old idea of kingship where it's hard to exercise absolute authority because you just cannot get orders to somebody in time. Yeah.
Even with many Palantiri, you could not get it all done. It's the infrastructure just doesn't quite exist for that level, for the level of control that a ruler like Sauron has.
Well, it's.
I mean, Sauron manages to be an absolute monarch without those limitations, but it still is like he also doesn't have to worry about people not consenting.
Yeah.
It's interesting too because the whole idea, the framing of Gondor as the place with this this level of perceived bureaucracy and organization, and how even down on the granular level, you've got things like on the one hand you have actual ruling princes, thus Prince Imrahil and Belfalas and all there, and that's very so much seen as okay, that's its own micro realm with a monarchical setup, even though it's on the princeling level. And then you have, I forget, it's the fishermen from like the Longstrand, things like this, with no clear leader or something, or maybe hillmen or something like that. The idea is sort of like, okay, there's people who are in a community, but they don't have that kind of hierarchical organization, although they are within the kingship and they do send people there. It's sort of like these levels of negotiation. The contrast is interesting because right next door is a kingdom, Rohan, obviously. Yeah. So, and that is something where it's more clearly, even though it's not a medieval style kingship, it is more seen to be an Anglo-Saxon-ish one, as much as we get any sort of sense of how political theory works there. But of course, there it's very indirect. There are vassals, there are people who hold various areas of Rohan, but we really don't get much more than that. Anything else beyond that is essentially fanfic, and as we've seen with a certain recent animated film. So there it's seen to be more direct. It's like, okay, there's the king, who's the political leader, who's the guy, the end. Whereas Gondor seems to be sort of like bifurcated, of course, accentuated by the absence of a king, thanks to the Ring stewards, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it feels like a classic Two Wolves situation, where Tolkien clearly does not like anyone getting in his business, telling him what to do, that sort of thing. And yet he does have this like unshakable insistence on having a monarch of some kind, which, again, it feels very, very Catholic, but it is just like, maybe did he ever examine this like weird, if your ideal king is one who is not around, why do you want one so bad? And it's really it's interesting, and we only see Theoden in essentially a time of war. We never get to see him just hanging out and doing whatever he might have done, which is an interesting choice, and like it makes complete sense given that Tolkien does not want to deal with kings in any other context. But I do find that quite interesting that he just could not shake this desire for a hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that. I don't know how specifically Catholic it is, although it does feel Catholic, that, like,
yeah, it's not only that Catholics are not the only one.
I know. Right. Like, there is an anointed ruler. He doesn't have to do anything, but he's got to be there to be the final word on something.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing. But I wonder, and this is something that I really don't know much about, but it feels kind of, his desire for a monarch feels, again, not an expert, I don't know anything about this, feels of a piece with the kind of the rise of fascism that was happening in England around that time, where a lot of people, for some reason, I don't know why, I just know that it was happening, were really into specific ideas of authority, and even if he's clearly not fascist,
right,
there's still, like, he feels like a little outlier on this wave of authoritarianism, where he's like, there's got to be an absolute ruler, even if he doesn't rule.
Right.
There's got to be one.
We still
and
need
everybody
a guy.
Else kind of, there's got to be a guy. And of course, everybody else is way more into the fascist part of it. But he's still, I think, is responding to whatever zeitgeist was happening in, early 20th century England.
Well, that also makes me think of, and we talked about this in our episode on the Lost Road, the sequence of the sort of alternate Numenor that he created, as opposed to the one that was essentially finalized in the Silmarillion publications and so forth, where we get the very paranoid version of what life would have been like under Ar-Pharazôn towards the end of Numenor's thing, where things are, clearly clearly both the king and, of course, Sauron, who's established there as well. Everything is just essentially nightmarish, and it's a case where it's sort of like, yeah, we need a guy, but this is what happens when you get a guy, and here's what you get. It's sort of like it's distinctly negative, but throwing against that, and notably maybe this is also something that he wrote in the early 60s when that period of time versus the late 30s when times had changed, is the one example I can think of that we get any sort of detailed sense of someone in their actual day-to-day acting as a human king in the Dune Númenórean line, dealing with things, who's not acting as a military leader, and that's Meneldur, the father of Eldarion.
Yes.
And that is, we go back to Eldarion and Arendis a number of times. I mean, there's a reason why I picked it for one of the first episodes way back when.
It's so good.
Yeah.
It's incredibly good. And the more time goes on, the better it gets. It's really the one I wish it's like, oh, if he'd only finished it. But one of the chief things about it is that we get to see what is a king in paradise, seemingly, to do and to model, and how they should be. And again, it's one of those things that, again, throw in the George R. R. Maker and Cainard, what's their tax policy in Winter at that time? We don't care. It doesn't matter. Instead, the idea is that he is, in this idea of the kingship, and it is at the time, the idea is that it's only men who can heir into the throne. This changes in Numenor's history later, which is something worth noting. The sense of him is someone who is, aware of he's aware of where he comes from. He's aware of what the Dunedain are very, very fortunate to have been able to do and be. And the idea of maintaining peace and maintaining a certain balance is not simply some sort of convenient fiction. It's the sort of idea is like, man, we got away from all this nonsense. Let's keep doing that. And that's what makes his interactions with Eldarion, especially as the story progresses, where he's sort of like going like, I don't know about getting involved in all this sort of thing again all that. And he very much explicitly fears both militarization on the one hand and its after effects, and especially the ruin effects of empire. And he also fears of just simply waiting and doing nothing and potentially being overwhelmed. That lends to his final just sort of agonizing choice about what to do. And he finally says, you know what, I just can't. And he just
punts. He just punts on the decision, which is kind of amazing.
He does. He punts, and he punts it to his kid and says, like, you're the heir. That also feeds into another one of Tolkien's ideas of wisdom, how a king should be, is that, especially in the context of the long-lived Dunedain, a king needs to know when to stop. A king needs to know when to let go. A king needs to know not to ride it out to the end. That for him is easily one of the worst sins, and it's something that he explicitly talks about, that when the Númenórean kings eventually just descend into the type of thing, they hold on to it until they're like literally falling apart, essentially inside or out, is sort of like he sees as just truly disgusting and just very much going against what the idea should be. And it's a very interesting modeling.
Yeah, it is. Also, it brings up this idea of Aragorn. He does earn the kingship by on his own merits, by being this leader, by all of the work he did before the text of the Lord of the Rings starts. Aragorn didn't have to be descended from Elros, Elrond's twin brother, in case any of our listeners have forgotten, but he is. Now, is this just well, kingship is hereditary, monarchy is hereditary, divine right, it's divine blood right, etc., etc. Is this strictly to tie Aragorn more tightly to the history of the world? Is it a storytelling device where, the guy you think is a stinky hobo is actually a king in exile? Classic. Or is this a vestige of this mindset where, heritable traits that, in my opinion, are not actually heritable, they're not genetic, but primarily, I think, given through nurture, people just think that being a good person is hereditary.
I don't know. I think he does kind of have to be related to Elros just because, legally speaking.
There's that legal thing.
It's a different kind of book if he isn't, I guess.
It's definitely a different kind of book, but also, there's that part where Faramir is talking about Boromir being like, why isn't my dad a king? And Denethor's like, that's not how it works here, honey. I don't know why Denethor sounds like RuPaul in his version, but...
Wow, there's a new vision.
like Gondor clearly is invested in this idea of having somebody of the correct line on the throne. I mean, at this point, like thousands of years, it's probably just like lip service, but still, like it matters that he has a legal claim to it. But it also, I think, yeah, it is to tie him into the history of the world more. I think otherwise,
what? Yeah.
Why else? Yeah, just in storytelling terms, like that's why it's there.
Well, it's interesting, too, to consider. And again, we're getting, I don't want to say deep into the weeds, but it's a way to think about, we grew up with what we know. And, the idea is that Aragorn is raised, for the most part, in Rivendell. And he's, knows everything in terms of what, Elrond and others are able to teach him. So he would have access to a lot. And if he does, then you think about the history of kingship in general among both elves and men. And you basically see a lot of things just failing, is what it comes down to. Notably, like, the whole idea of the High King of the Noldor, well, that all falls apart. Nearly all the kings, one way or another, get killed during the First Age in the battles with Morgoth. The only one who's left to claim the kingship at the end is Gil-galad. And then he's gone. Yeah. And then notably, he doesn't get replaced. That's the elves do not seek another king, or at least the Noldor specifically do not seek another king. There's still Thranduil, of course, in Mirkwood, but there is no other elf king as such in the remnant of. Let's see there, Círdan is always said to be the leader as the shipwright of that particular group, but he never claims a kingship. It's notable that he never once claims a kingship. He acknowledges Thingol, speaking of past king, as an overlord, but that's about it. And then Elrond, he doesn't. And Galadriel and Celeborn are the lord and lady of Lorien. They're not the ruling monarchs, so they don't claim this term. And then similarly, of course, this is again part of the elaborate history that's been set up, is that Gondor is the distant kingdom down a way that doesn't have kings anywhere and stewards. He knows that. And meantime, what does he see about the history of Arnor, where he's being raised? It falls apart very dramatically. It breaks into smaller kingdoms, principalities. Finally, officially, the leaders of the Dunedain, simply the chieftains, is what it is. It's almost explicitly tribal, really, at that point. So it's interesting that with all that said, of all these disappearing overlords and monarchs and things not there, all of a sudden it's sort of like, and I'm going to be the one in charge of all this huge landmass. Right?
No wonder he's like, oh, you guys can all just kind of take care of yourselves.
Can I not
I'll
think
let
about
you know
you,
when I
please?
need something.
I'll sign your paychecks, but you can do whatever you want.
Call yourself the Thane, Yeah.
It's
cool.
Yeah.
I do find it interesting that Aragorn also, like, we do know a little bit about how he was as a, theoretically a more peacetime king. He does, it seems like, lay these policies out of, like, he gives land around the, oh god, what's the lake? I didn't put it in my notes. Yeah. The peoples enslaved by Sauron they get to just be where they are. It's fine. He makes peace with Harad. Like, the Druidine get a guarantee that no one will come into their forest without permission. So this is all, like, solid work, which is also, this leads back into our orc episode. Everything leads back to the orc episode, I feel like. It is
the biggest problem in the legendary.
Truly, because, like, the orcs and troll, all the beastie type servants of Sauron are destroyed or killed. Aragorn does not seem like the kind of guy who would do a genocide. So
hopefully,
you kind of have to set. Tolkien never squared that circle. He certainly tried, and he never got there. But I find that interesting. Then, of course, Tolkien starts this story that takes place after Aragorn is long cold in the ground of the men sort of undoing all of this, which is interesting to me. I feel like I had like a wider point there that I just can't remember.
Well, I mean, the New Shadow in its own fragmentary way, since we don't actually see anything of Eldarion, his son, as king at the time, we have no idea what he's like or meant to be doing. We tend to assume that he turned out reasonably well, but we don't know. And maybe Tolkien was sort of, just befuddled by that in turn. Something that occurred to me in terms of what we see of Aragorn as a king, and which ties into what we see of him in the book when he's before king is the idea that he can, I don't want to say he can do it all, but there's the sense of the personal touch is what it is. He is said to be the one who, like, he sets all the terms out for everything you just described, making peace, saying these things. He does it all himself. And the idea is sort of like, okay, that's what a king is supposed to do and all that. But again, it's one of those things more to think about. It's like, is that the idea that there should be no bureaucracy as such in the idea that you just simply come to the guy and he's there and he will respond to you and all that? We don't know that, and we only
does
basically
make sense though, because Tolkien really hated the idea of the state, which
the apparatus of the state.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Which is that, like, what do you? How do you think every state has this kind? Like, there's no state where you can just go right to the big boss.
No, that's not a thing. You're not really a king if, like, people can just. If you're just doing everything yourself, that's not.
You got to delegate it. You got to.
Suddenly got the idea of Aragorn taking out his own trash. Who's cleaning up the palace?
I wouldn't put it past him.
But yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. And again, this verges on the George R. R. Martin formulation, har. But it does raise a point that, again, what you were saying, Oriana, the desired state is minimal. The desired state is there. What is Gondor's diplomatic foreign service? And all that. For instance, the most that we see of that sort of relation is that basically Gondor goes, we need help. Send a messenger over to Rohan and they'll respond. It's sort of like, easy as that, is it?
Yeah.
Not no experience with reality. But it works, of course, in the formulation he has it set up. I mean, it almost goes back to maybe a deeper question. What type of king, what type of ruler of the world is Manwë?
He's not very good.
I mean, there's questions to be asked here.
He's like the kind of boss that's always like on business lunches with other CEOs.
Dude, Manwë insists on mandatory fun. Don't ask me to explain this. Don't ask me to explain. I just feel it, okay?
I can buy this.
I think he's always in his office, and every now and then you get a memo, or like you see him in passing on the way to like some restaurant to meet with somebody over lunch. Like,
but he's always checking his phone because he can see everything that's going on. Yeah. So he has all the information.
Mildly distracted.
You're always left on red by Manwë.
Oh my god!
But Thank you for the episode title.
He does he makes some pretty bad decisions at multiple points, which is and like that is on purpose. Tolkien is very aware of the flawed nature of Manwë's decision making. So I feel like, again, it's so interesting that this is a man who is like, yes, kings. Yes, king. Oh my god!
Oh, wow! We are getting the RuPaul territory
here. But who's like most of his, Theoden is fine, especially like once he is de-worm tongued. But like so many of them make these terrible mistakes. Shouldn't be,
Sorry, I'm getting over the deworming image of.
Right.
Like Jared, that was just too good. I'm still laughing. But your point is taken, though.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're going to think about sort of like other kings we can sort of throw in as a model, and again, we don't really have much on this as well. We've got the dwarves. And the idea of like because they are explicitly monarchical, and there we get very, very strong senses of particular family loyalties or connections, at least within certain groups of people. Durin's folk versus the other folk, as we see in the Revenge War to avenge Thorir and all that. The dwarves who are not part of Durin's folk are like, well, we're part of this, but they draw the distinction, although within that certain thing. And again, the idea of the kingship and particular roles, not only of Moria but also of Erebor, etc. And these lordships are very, very strongly felt. Although interestingly, Thorin doesn't claim to be a king until he's actually in the realm. He may be a princeling in exile, but he does not claim to be the monarch. I thought that's a very interesting sort of thing. And again, if we see, again, we can't extrapolate from the random examples we have, as much as we have as The Hobbit, and that, again, is a much different book. But we have other instances. We have, the bits that we have in the appendices and things like that. And again, it's not that, what's interesting is that it's not a militarized society, although they're a fighting society. It's more sort of like, we got to deal with another bunch of orcs again, and things like that. So it's kind of like the reaction, as opposed to going out somewhere and conquering areas. That's not really their thing. It's more like, we've got our realm over here, and you assholes keep bothering us.
They're very resource focused,
right?
Yeah, they're medieval. They're agrarian people.
They're mineral people.
They're mineral. Yeah. Well, I'm thinking I guess in broader terms, like everybody is. Yeah. The majority of the population has to be subsistence farmers. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's going to fall. That's just how it worked. I forget what my point was already, but because they're not a particularly militarized society, because they absolutely couldn't be with the resources that they have, and then they don't have the population to do anything bigger at that point. The point of time, the point in time that Lord of the Ring takes place.
Yeah,
wow, I can't talk suddenly. I am so sorry.
Well, no, it's true. They don't have the numbers. Like, there just aren't enough dwarves to do to create this kind of hyper militarized, and they're also just more focused on craft, as true sons of Aule. We'll fight over a necklace, but it's because of the necklace, not because we like fighting.
And what's also interesting now, thinking of The Hobbit too, is that we have essentially, I don't want to say Tolkien repeats himself, but he does have his parallels, is that in his own particular way, Bard is kind of the mini Aragorn for The Hobbit.
Yeah.
Similar thing is
Aragorn.
Because it's like, exactly. So, someone who was, disenfranchised, was descended from the Lord of Dale, the monarch essentially of Dale and all that, even though, again, wasn't called a king, although the idea is now that, we see him claimed as king, specifically by the remnant of the people who survived Lake Town's thing. Yeah. Their reaction is not simply to say, hey, you're a new leader, you're a new master of the town. It's sort of like, you're the king. It's sort of like, that's an interesting leap.
Yeah.
Now that you think about it, it's sort of like, where did that come from?
Do people in the survivors of Lake Town and the people of Gondor just after the fall of Sauron are very eager to have Aragorn become king, Bard eager for him to become king? Is that just a thing where people after a large conflict disaster just kind of? I guess that makes sense.
It can, but I guess it depends on the system, too. I mean, a series, sort of stepping outside the podcast and Tolkien for a bit, a podcast I've enjoyed for many years now is by the historian and writer Patrick Wyman, Tides of History, growing out of his Fall of Rome podcast. Yeah, it's very, very good. I mean, huge amount of episodes by now. If you want to take the plunge with that, you'll be doing that for some months. But something I think he's done he's had a great value in showing is how assumptions of how monarchy is the natural way of human civilization is not really the case. His studies of the Indus civilization, about how there was no sense of any hierarchy at all. I thought was a very interesting deep dive, pointing out how one of the earliest human civilizations that can be called civilization in the sense of organization, city stuff, and all the rest of it's hierarchy, ruler. Was there one? There doesn't seem any evidence of one. Yeah. And then also thinking to your point that you were just raising, Oriana, about people seeming to default to that in emergency. Well, I mean, this is one of his areas of expertise. We're talking about the Roman Republic, where, again, we all see what happened when republics get corrupted. Har har. But the idea is you would have emergency dictatorial situations, and then after that you're supposed to just relax and stop doing that anymore. And so the idea is, okay, so there might be an idea of hey, you Bard, sure, you're our guy right now, but again, we look at the matter of what did he do? He killed the dragon, ergo you're our king. It's sort of boy, what have you done? Now he reveals, notably, if we're talking about the value of a king, he reveals to be someone who is good for planning, talking with the Elven king, getting resources to his people. So he demonstrates his worthiness as a leader, but he gets the acclaim to be the leader and has to be the leader first. Yeah. And in those terms, it's an interesting reversal. You'd think it'd be the other way around.
Yeah, I think you can kind of see that as also, Tolkien being it makes it, I like it better if somebody proves their worth before they get the job.
Right.
They got to go through an interview process. They can't just get it.
We're seeing a bunch of other candidates.
No Nepo babies here.
Right.
Ironically.
What is monarchy but the ultimate Nepo baby? Come on.
Truly.
Yeah.
What a vision. Well, I'm trying to think of other things. Well, let's see. I mean, it's interesting how we get monarchs in certain ways in other species even. We get lords of the eagles who get crowns. Remember how Gwahir gets a crown?
Yeah. A thing that I'm sure, like, every eagle's, like, dream.
Yeah. Definitely doesn't look silly.
How does it even stay on?
Maybe it sort of
It's got a chin strap.
Yeah, maybe it sort of weaves into the feathers on the head or things like that.
Oh, my God.
But again, it's the crown, it's the symbol, it's the thing, and all that. It is interesting that it's not the crown that's the main thing in the Númenórean thing, it's the scepter.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like it's the same sort of thing. But where serves the idea of kings, rulers, crowns, headdresses? No, it's not, and it's not even a sword. The other thing, it's not the military. It's more like, hi, this is a particular staff. And it's sort of like,
that's an incredibly ancient real world idea too. Like Mesopotamian kings had a scepter that they carried around. Like I like that touch. It's kind of just there if you know about this kind of thing, but it's a very old idea that the crown was just kind of maybe a nice decoration to have, but the symbol of authority was a scepter, or occasionally a mace. But
is that sort of a piece with Tolkien cribbing some aspects of Númenórean society from Egypt? Ancient Egypt?
There's definitely some of that as well. His own drawing, if I remember, of what's meant to be the winged crown for Gondor and all that, very much feels like an Egyptian pharaonic.
It's definitely inspired. I have to admit, I hate that drawing. I think it's ugly.
It wasn't one of his best.
Yes, I also
despise his design for the crown of Gondor.
I don't like it. It reminds me of the head of the xenomorph in Alien.
Really? I just think it looks like a bowling pin. Which, I mean, the Egyptian crown looked like a bowling pin.
Yeah.
But, the double crown had both, obviously. It was the crown of Lower or Upper Egypt, and that was the white bowling pin.
Yeah.
Either way, it looked awful, is the point.
It did not eat.
Sorry to any ancient Egyptians who are listening, but your guys, that crown, you need to
redesign, rebrand.
The red crown looked great. Go with that one. Leave the white bowling pin alone.
Tutankhamun, up your game. Maybe to tie this back to again the idea of what a good king should be, and your point there, Oriana, is maybe to think about this more again in the framing of, kind of as mentioned, how we first meet him and where he seems most comfortable. He's not the center of attention in the Prancing Pony. He's the guy in the corner just riding the vibe.
Yeah.
And Bree is not too far from the Shire, literally, but in also the sense of who runs it.
Yeah, Bree does not seem to have any kind of. They don't even seem to have a mayor. Which good for you guys. Barleyman is the closest to an authority figure, I guess, and he's just a conduit of information.
He's just some guy.
He's the town gossip.
Yeah, I feel like Bree must have the elders or whatever, but. There's no government that we see.
They don't come up. The whole thing happens. The inn is attacked. There's this whole sort of thing. There's clearly suspicious characters in town, but nobody's throwing them out. Can there be? There's no one to throw them out. Things like that.
Who's setting the watch? Because they do have a gate and gatekeeper. Who is setting that? Again, we don't actually need to know this, but it is kind of interesting.
Somebody's got to be doing it,
right? Yeah.
Right? Is it Butterbur? Is ADHD ass Barleyman Butterbur?
He's definitely too busy and distracted to be in charge of
exactly.
Maybe
that's why they have him in charge, though. Maybe that's the secret. So he's busy, we can do whatever we want. Put him in charge, and then we know.
What you want is a king with ADHD.
Yeah. Perfect. But again, he's in charge of the postal service, I guess. Except you give him a letter, he won't mail it. But
right.
But again, it all ties into this idea that for a guy who's comfortable sitting in the shadows and just perfectly being that, and even regarded people so it's that guy, we'll feed him, but that's about it. All of a sudden becoming the chief guy, and it makes that detail of, I care if it's Frodo or Merry, whoever tells Butterbur, oh, he loves your food, he enjoys it so much, and all the rest of it. It's sort of in context, be like, that guy, God, he was always weird.
It's so funny. This just It's something I've noticed, but like now I get a chance to talk about it. It's so funny that Butterbur's idea of a king doesn't match what Aragorn is actually doing. He's like, oh, he's sitting on a throne, drinking from a golden cup, like living in luxury, whatever. And Aragorn is like clearly hard at work, constantly doing stuff. I don't know. Where does he get that idea? Where does that come from?
Where has he seen that before? Like, why? How did he form that particular opinion? Interesting.
Because kings have not been around in that area of town, area of Middle Earth.
Which is like even more of a reason to be like, yeah, who is coming through? And is it like dwarven kings that you're thinking about, or is it like
the Elven King,
Friendwill?
Rohan? Just our stories of old where you figure they sort of like lived at places.
Like, Golden Hall of Mediceld, and just totally scrambled it in his brain.
Just ran with it.
Yeah.
But again, it seems like the thing that Aragorn has the most fondness for are these places who they may or may not have particular leaders. Again, the Shire has sort of leaders. Bree, we don't know anything. Rivendell kind of has Elrond by default, but sort of like, well, I built my house.
Right, you guys he's just playing host to a bunch of freeloaders.
Yeah, you just live there. I don't know. Yeah. Like he's a lord, but he's not a king.
Yeah. It just and so it does those things and so again it comes back to your point about taking it in, becoming the monarch. I mean, it makes that scene when the Fellowship is about to leave, when Aragorn is there, his head bowed, and all the rest of it. It's almost sort of like we think about the context later reveals he's thinking about he finally get his girl, things like this. But now it's more so like, boy, if I do this and this actually pulls off, I'm going to have to be doing a lot more now.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Is his ancestor Baron only had to get a Silmaril. It was an errand. It was a tough errand. Don't get me wrong.
Yes,
but you go, you get a thing, and you come back, and that's all you have to do. Aragorn has to get this crazy job.
He's committing to a lifestyle.
Yeah. That's a lot to ask. I think.
And we don't see him regretting. I take it back. The closest thing we see to him sort of regretting or wondering about what he's done as the right thing is the bit where he and Gandalf go up on Mount Mindolene. And he's sort of it's almost the one moment after he's essentially been acclaimed and become the king. It's sort of are all my hopes actually going to come true? And you can read it different ways, but part of it is sort of okay, I've taken this on. Is this actually happening? It's a very personal thing, but at the same time, I can understand him saying that. And of course, we see the tree is revived and things like this. It's a lovely scene. I think it's a bit underrated. We don't get that in the films, but I will say this. I do like the touch that the film gave where we see after Aragorn gets the crown on, he takes a deep breath okay, this is my last moment to myself, and now I'm the guy. It's sort of after that, forget it. This is your last little moment. It's a tiny little touch, but I actually like it as an adaptational choice. It actually works. You get this. It's the one little sense of all right. It's interesting.
Hold on to your butts.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy. Well, keeping an eye on the time, maybe if we want to start thinking about wrapping up, just final thoughts. For me, there's not much more to add. I mean, it's interesting, I will say, if we want to bring in sort of un-Tolkien, or not un-Tolkien, un-Middle-earth modes in terms of kingship. Farmer Giles, of course, Giles is someone who just, randomly becomes a king. It's sort of hey, and everything's a lot more you're relaxed, and hey, it helps you have a dragon around. And in Smith of Wootton Major, there's no kingship at all. There's elven queens and things like this, but Wootton Major is just it's mostly run by the chefs as far as we can tell, and things like that. And again, this sense of kings that are either really good but really far away, or absent, or learn to leave people alone. It's sort of it's an interesting argument against, I would say, not human nature, but this idea that sort of be our acclaimed person who saved us and healed us and do all this stuff, but otherwise don't bother us. And that's really hard if you're not all on the same page.
Yeah, the king is somebody who could be called upon if needed, but you kind of don't want to need him.
Just like a fire extinguisher.
Yeah.
You hope you never need him.
Break glass in case of emergency.
But yeah.
Ain't that the way? Jared, any last thoughts yourself, or?
No, well.
King as fire extinguisher.
King is fire extinguisher.
There you go. And Oriana, do you want to wrap it all up?
Yeah, I like bringing this back to like Aragorn in particular. I like they're just like a few these little moments where I think Aragorn, these little touches where you're like, yeah, man, it would be great if like the person who is in charge of everything did this kind of thing. Like he helps Bilbo out with his song. Like there's no reason that Aragorn should be doing like, you know, this is like the first time he's seen his lady in a while. There's all this news that's come in, like, and he takes the time to help Bilbo to like make a song about Arendelle, and he's like, all right, man, like fine, you know, that's cool. And then like him holding Frodo's hand and them running, I can't remember if it's up or downhill, I should have checked, but when they're in Lorien and you know he came there never again as a living man, but just that like he takes the time to connect with people. And that's, you know, I'm not into monarchy. I don't think that's really a good thing, a good way to like do things. But if Aragorn were my king, I think it would be okay for a little bit at least.
Yeah. Until he dies and his
then
we've
got a problem. Then we've got problems.
And we do it all over again. Okay.
It's almost like that's why it's a bad system.
I mean,
one of the reasons why, certainly.
The things we learn.
We should elect the king.
We should be like Naboo.
Oh my god.
Okay, let's stop here.
No.
All right, so the time has come to look ahead to the next episode. The choice of topic is Jared's. Jared, what are we talking about next time?
Well, very funny that you chose the news item that you did, because I do want to talk about the Atlas of Middle-earth.
All right, great. That is fantastic. So,
yeah.
I mean,
apropos.
You folks out there listening, you have a month. Find this book. Seriously, if you are, I mean, I don't want to say every Tolkien reader has to have this book, but if there is one of two non-Tolkien written books on Middle-earth that are kind of key, one would be, it used to be The Complete Guide to Middle-earth by Robert Foster, which is really fantastic, although arguably some of Wayne Hammond and Christina Scull's guides have semi-superseded them, but something like that is one of the concordances or whatever really good. But the other one is the Atlas. The Atlas is just too good, and I love the fact that we'll be talking about it. I have things to say, but I want to hear what you all have to say, and that'll be more important. So yeah, find a copy, and we should note for people, there are 2 editions of the Atlas, both of which are worth it. The original one basically takes it up through Unfinished Tales, which is around when it got published. However, the second edition takes advantage of all the stuff that was published in the History of Middle-earth series, and that provides a lot more interesting detail and new conceptions and things like this, and it's interesting to sort of compare the two. But anyway, just whichever one you get one. It's fantastic. So, with that said, thank you all very much for listening. We really appreciate it as always. You can find us again at megaphonic.fm/by-the-bywater with our episode guides there. You can always email us at bythebywater@gmail.com. And of course, you can find both the show and all of us individually on Blue Sky. Feel free to find us there. Links are provided from our main page, so you can sort of follow us and see what's going on. And keep an eye out for other news and things and stuff as they come up. We appreciate it greatly. Remember, if you support the Megaphonic FM Patreon, you can join our Discord and join all of us there talking about all sorts of things. It's really fun. So, thank you again. We will talk to you all next time. Until then.